Hi guys, and welcome to Calm Night Radio Channel. Tonight we step into Virginia in the year 1662, where the air smells of wet earth, wood smoke, and tobacco leaves drying in the dark, and where one quiet legal decision is about to change countless lives. You walk into a colony that looks rough, hungry, and improvised. Yet it is already learning how to be cruel in an organised way. Small boats knock against muddy landings, hammers tap in the distance. Pigs root where they please, because of course they do. Men talk of crops, prices, and obedience with the solemnity of priests, as if tobacco were a religion and profit its demanding god. So, before you settle into the story, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, and while you are here, comment with your location and local time. Now, dim the lights and let yourself drift into a Virginia evening where the insects hum in the reeds, the river moves like black silk, and you begin to see how daily life for Black Americans was being pressed into a shape that would be harder and harder to escape. You arrive by the water first, because nearly everything in early Virginia begins at a riverbank. Roads are poor, forests are thick, and the broad brown rivers do much of the work. The colony stretches along the James and its tributaries in loose plantations and scattered dwellings. It does not look like a grand empire. It looks damp, unstable, and slightly one bad harvest away from panic. The smell reaches you before the people do. Salt from the river, rotting marsh grass, smoke from green wood that never quite burns cleanly. Then the sweeter, heavier scent of curing tobacco, the crop that pulls so many decisions into its orbit. Tobacco pays debts, buys tools, fills ships, and devours labour. It is greedy, exhausting, and everywhere. You walk past crude houses made of timber and clay. Some are small and draughty, with earthen floors that hold the chill after sunset. Others are larger and built to display a planter's rising status, though even these can feel rough at the edges. A chicken darts across your path. Somewhere nearby, a child coughs. Somewhere farther off, an overseer shouts. In this world, black men, women, and children live under conditions that vary, but never by enough to make the danger disappear. Some are enslaved for life. Some still move through legal grey areas created by the colony's earlier disorder. A few black Virginians own small property, go to court, or make labour arrangements that are not yet fully locked into the harsh racial system that later generations will recognise so clearly. This is one reason the year 1662 matters so much. The rules are tightening, ambiguity is shrinking, the colony is deciding what it wants black life to mean. You feel that uncertainty in the way people speak. Not always openly, not always honestly, but it is there. English colonists talk about labour shortages, discipline and order. They talk about servants and slaves, Christians and non-Christians, English custom and colonial necessity. The words can sound technical, almost boring. That is often how life-changing injustice arrives, not with thunder, with paperwork. Virginia in 1662 is still a young colony by European standards. Jamestown was founded in 1607, and the decades since then have been full of disease, hunger, war, and improvisation. Many English settlers who came here did not arrive as masters of vast estates. They came as indentured servants, poor migrants, and hopeful strivers. The social order has not always been neat. In the earlier decades, the lines between different kinds of unfreedom could appear unstable, at least from a distance. European indentured servants worked brutally hard for a term of years. Africans and their descendants faced conditions that could be equally punishing and increasingly permanent. The difference was becoming more decisive with each passing decade. You pass a tobacco field in the morning and feel the sticky heat gathering even before noon. The plants stand thick and broad-leaved, sucking life from the soil and from the people bent over them. Labour begins early. There is clearing land, digging holes, setting plants, weeding, worming, cutting, hanging, packing. Hands move fast because the crop demands it. Backs ache because the crop does not care. For black labourers, the day is measured in tasks and watchfulness. You hear the rustle of leaves, the slap of mud against bare ankles, the creak of carts, the whine of insects that never seem to sleep. Sweat dries and returns, shirts cling to the skin, hands grow rough from tools and stalks. The work is intimate with the body, and the control over that body is what the colony is trying to settle with greater force. At the edges of the field, daily life continues in quieter forms. Fires are lit, corn is ground, fish are cleaned, clothes are patched, infants are carried on tired hips. People speak softly when they can. They exchange small looks that say more than speech safely can. Survival here depends on attention. You notice who is angry, who is drunk, who is desperate, who might sell, punish, inform, or strike. It is a society built on labour, but also on reading danger. A mainstream fact of life in Virginia is impossible to miss. Tobacco dominates the colony's economy. It shapes land use, status, politics, and above all the demand for labour. As plantations expand, planters want workers they can control more completely and for longer periods. Black labour becomes increasingly central to that vision. This is not an accidental drift. It is an economic choice wrapped inside legal language, and yet daily life is never made only of large systems. It is made of odd details too. You might glance down and see shoes stuffed with dried grass for warmth. You might hear that people in the colony drink small beer or cider because water can be unreliable. You might even find a planter carefully guarding imported tableware in a house where drafts whistle through the walls. Human beings adore status symbols in the middle of chaos. Some things never change. There are also stranger colonial habits. Livestock wander with astonishing confidence, rooting through yards and lanes as if they personally founded Virginia. Beds are often shared for warmth. Fleas are regular companions. And in a place obsessed with rank, appearance can still be rather rumpled. The colony wants hierarchy, but it has not yet mastered elegance. For black Americans in this setting, the texture of life is defined by vulnerability and adaptation. Some came directly from Africa. Others were born in the English Atlantic world. Languages, memories, and customs mingle under pressure. Foodways shift. Religious practices bend, hide, persist. Knowledge travels quietly, from person to person, in gestures, recipes, planting habits, healing techniques, songs half remembered, names carefully spoken. You begin to understand that the colony is full of intelligence it does not value properly. Black labourers know rivers, soils, weather, and tools. They know how to mend, carry, plant, preserve, and endure. Women often manage difficult combinations of fieldwork, domestic labour, childcare, and food preparation. Men may labour under direct supervision in fields, workshops, or transport. Children learn early that the adults around them are watched, and that they are being watched too. Night brings a different atmosphere. The light fades from gold to blue, then to a darkness broken by fire. Frogs begin their steady calls from the marsh. Smoke settles low. You can feel the damp rising from the ground into your clothes. In those hours, people may find a little room to speak more freely, though never freely enough. There may be whispered talk of kin, places left behind, rumours of law, the moods of masters, the possibilities of baptism, flight, bargaining, or nothing more dramatic than making it through another week. Historians still argue over exactly how fluid racial status remained in the earliest decades of Virginia, and how far individual black people could manoeuvre within that unstable world before later laws narrowed every opening. The records are incomplete, and the colony did not always classify people consistently. Some evidence shows surprising complexity, other evidence shows harsh continuity. Both truths can sit uneasily together. That uncertainty matters because 1662 did not appear out of thin air. The law that year would declare that a child's condition followed that of the mother. In plain terms, it made enslaved status hereditary through the maternal line. It gave slavery a self-reproducing future. But even as that legal shift approached, the daily world around you was already teaching the colony how to live with the logic behind it. A society does not wake up one morning and invent inescapable bondage from nothing. It practices. You see that practice in the courthouse, where technical language helps convert greed into routine. You see it in households where black women's labour is treated as endlessly available. You see it in fields where exhaustion is normal, in punishments designed to warn others, in the habit of discussing people as assets even while demanding their total effort as human beings. The contradiction is obvious. The colony simply chooses not to care. There is bitter irony here. English colonists often speak of rights, liberties, inheritance, and the protections of law. They cherish these ideas intensely when applied to themselves. They can recite them with impressive feeling. Yet when profit is at stake, legal creativity suddenly becomes very flexible. It turns out liberty was a treasured principle with selective staffing. Still, life for black Americans in 1662 is not only the story of oppression from above, it is also the story of presence, of being there in a place trying to define you without your consent. You hear laughter sometimes, brief and real. You notice care in the way food is prepared or fabric is tied. You sense the tenderness with which a mother steadies a child on uneven ground. You see people preserve a self that the colony keeps trying to reduce to labour value. Morning returns, and with it the ordinary machinery of the day. A pot hangs over coals, the river glints through mist. The chill of dawn lingers on your hands until work warms them. Someone shoulders a hoe. Someone lifts a bucket. Someone glances toward the path, measuring who approaches. Life goes on because it must. And as you stand in that dim Virginia light, with the smell of mud and smoke and tobacco wrapped around you, you can feel how the colony is hardening. Not loudly, not all at once, but steadily, in documents, in expectations, in the treatment of children, in the reach of masters, in the narrowing space allowed to black life. What surrounds you is not yet the fully matured slave system of later centuries. It is something more dangerous in its way, a system becoming confident. That is the uneasy truth of this place. The houses are crude, the roads are poor, the institutions are still forming, but the desire to extract labour without limit is already becoming clear, and black Americans are the ones forced to live inside that decision first. You walk through a colony that looks unfinished, yet one part of its future is coming into focus with chilling precision. In 1662, the law is preparing to say what many planters already want to believe, that bondage can be inherited, organised, defended, and made ordinary. The river keeps moving beside it all, calm and indifferent. Reeds stir along the bank, insects sing into the warm dark. The night air cools your skin at last, and somewhere in that heavy silence, Virginia is learning how to make slavery feel permanent. You wake to the faint grey of dawn spreading over the Virginia tidewater, where the marsh smells cool and metallic, and the first sounds are not voices but birds, insects, and water nudging the bank. Mist hangs low over the river. The air touches your face with a damp softness that will vanish once the sun climbs. For a few moments, the colony feels quiet, almost gentle. That is the trick of early morning. It hides what the day plans to do. As the light strengthens, figures begin to move across the plantation landscape. A woman stoops near a fire, coaxing it back to life from last night's embers. Someone carries a wooden pail that knocks softly against a knee. A child rubs sleep from tired eyes. In the distance, a gate creaks open, and the sound seems to travel farther than it should in the cool air. Soon enough the routines of labour will take over, but first there is this brief suspended hour when human beings gather themselves before being claimed by work. For Black Americans in Virginia during this period, life is shaped by uncertainty that can cut in several directions at once. Not freedom exactly, certainly not safety, but uncertainty all the same. The legal status of black people is becoming harsher and more fixed. Yet in daily life, the colony still contains pockets of ambiguity, places where custom, bargaining, religion, and local habit have not fully settled into one rigid pattern. That instability is not kindness. It simply means the trap is still being built in pieces. You walk through a settlement where categories are constantly discussed because they matter so much to power. Servant, slave, Christian, heathen, free, bound, legitimate, illegitimate, English, African, mixed ancestry. The people with authority speak as though these words are natural facts, as permanent as the river. They are not. They are tools, and the colony is learning how to sharpen them. A mainstream truth stands right in front of you. In 17th century Virginia, labour systems overlap in messy ways. Indentured servitude remains common among poor Europeans, and many white labourers also endure severe hardship, long terms of service, and corporal punishment. Yet black labourers face a tightening set of expectations that increasingly point toward lifetime bondage. The colony is not simply distinguishing workers by class. It is building a racial order that will become much harder to escape. That order is visible in the posture of the people around you. Some white servants grumble openly when an overseer turns away. A few can imagine a term ending. Land, perhaps, or at least movement. Black workers, especially those treated as enslaved for life, are watched through a different lens. Their labour is counted not as temporary use but as permanent possession. You can feel the distinction in the silence expected of them. The houses where black people live are usually modest, often painfully so. Rough timber walls, cracks that let in cold air, floors packed hard with dirt, smoke that clings to fabric and hair, a stool with one leg slightly shorter than the others, a clay pot blackened from repeated use, a few carefully kept objects that matter because they are yours, or as near to yours as this place allows. The touch of the room is coarse, splinters in wood, dampness in corners, heat from a small fire that never quite reaches every part of the body. Food is another measure of life. Cornmeal appears often, along with salted meat when available, fish, beans, and whatever can be grown, gathered or stretched. The smell of corn cakes on a griddle can feel comforting for a moment, even in a hard place. So can the sight of greens simmering in a pot, or the sharp, clean scent of herbs crushed between fingers. People make nourishment out of scarcity because there is no alternative. Meals are practical, repetitive, and deeply important. You notice something else as you watch the morning unfold. Skill is everywhere. A man repairs a tool handle with quick, precise cuts. A woman judges heat by holding her palm near the pot rather than over it. Someone knots cord with practiced fingers. Someone else spots changing weather in the movement of clouds over the trees. The colony depends heavily on black knowledge while refusing to honour it. That is one of its ugliest habits. Some black Virginians still manage to inhabit limited spaces of autonomy. There are cases of free black people in the colony, though their freedom is precarious and constrained. A few acquire land, testify in court, trade goods, or maintain households. Their existence reminds you that the future is not yet fully settled in law. Even as the pressure toward racialized slavery increases, freedom here is narrow, exposed, and always at risk of being questioned by someone richer, whiter, or better connected. The courthouse offers one of the strangest scenes in the colony. You step inside and the air changes at once. It smells of paper, wax, sweat, and damp wood. Voices lower, though not because anyone has become noble. It is simply the sound of power putting on formal shoes. Records are written, disputes are heard, ownership is affirmed, small decisions ripple outward into everyday life. A black person may appear here to petition, defend, or be judged. Sometimes the result reveals a tiny opening. Just as often it reveals how quickly authority can close ranks. Scholars still debate how much room for negotiation actually existed for black Virginians in these decades, because surviving records tend to preserve extraordinary cases rather than ordinary suffering. A person who appears in legal documents may look more visible than most, yet visibility itself could reflect conflict, vulnerability, or rare circumstance. The silence of the archive can be misleading. It often hides the scale of human strain. Religion adds another layer of uncertainty. English colonists claim Christianity as a mark of civilization, but they are not always consistent about what that means for black people. Some Africans and African-descended people are baptized. Some attend Christian worship. Some absorb biblical language while also keeping older spiritual habits alive in quieter ways. Colonists sometimes argue over whether baptism should alter a person's status. That argument matters because religion can open a crack in the wall, however narrow. It can also be sealed off as soon as it threatens property claims. You stand near a small church one Sunday and hear the rustle of clothes, the scrape of shoes, the low murmur of gathered people. The building is plain, the sermon is long. The air inside is stale with breath and wool and damp boards. A baby fusses, someone coughs. A preacher speaks of sin, obedience, salvation, and the order of the world. These themes are not chosen at random. Religion in Virginia often serves the social structure as faithfully as it serves heaven. Even so, belief is not a simple instrument. Black people can hear the same scripture and draw different meanings from it. Stories of deliverance, endurance, and judgment carry their own quiet force. The official message may insist on submission, but human beings are skilled at listening with two minds at once. One ear hears command, the other hears possibility. The colony is full of curious details that reveal how improvised life still feels. People sleep under coarse blankets stuffed with whatever can provide warmth. Window glass is scarce enough that shutters or oiled cloth may stand in for luxury. Vermin are ordinary companions. Teeth fail early, and everyone seems to be either patching a roof, boiling something mysterious, or complaining about the weather in terms that suggest the sky has personally offended them. The 17th century has many historical achievements. Comfort is not among the finest. Clothing tells its own story. Fabric is valuable, and garments are repeatedly repaired, altered, and handed down. Linen shirts grow thin from wear, wool scratches, shoes stiffen with mud and damp, a head wrap, a kerchief, a carefully tied strip of cloth can become both necessity and expression. In a world determined to reduce people to labour, the arrangement of clothing still carries dignity. Even modest choices can feel meaningful. Family life exists under constant strain, but it exists. That matters. Mothers soothe children with rhythm and touch. Men form attachments that may never receive legal respect. Older people pass along advice that is practical and emotional at once. How to recognize a dangerous mood, how to stretch meal portions, how to remember a name properly, how to hold yourself when someone wants you bent. These lessons are part of the fabric of survival. Children absorb the colony quickly. They learn who may strike them, who may protect them, and who cannot. They learn the sounds that signal work, worship, anger, and opportunity. They learn that adults speak differently when certain people are near. Childhood here is not sentimental, it is alert. Yet children also play when they can, chasing one another near the edges of yards, laughing with a force that briefly cuts through the atmosphere of control. The sound is bright and sudden. It does not ask permission. You pass by a garden plot in the late afternoon and catch the smell of turned soil warming under the sun. Leaves brush your hand. A bee drifts lazily over blossoms as if the colony's moral corruption were none of its concern. Here, in these small patches of cultivated ground, you see how black households and individuals may create bits of sustenance, that are not fully dictated by the plantation's main crop. Herbs, vegetables, and practical plants can support health, flavour, and memory. A garden is never just a garden when so much else is denied. Some healing knowledge travels this way too. Roots, bark, poultices, infusions, remedies for fever, stomach pain, wounds, coughs. African medical traditions mix with native knowledge and European materials in the rough laboratory of colonial necessity. Not every cure works, of course. Some probably taste like a personal insult from the forest. But practical healing matters in a place where illness is constant and care is uneven. Social life, when it emerges, does so in fragments. A conversation while carrying water, a shared joke over a stubborn mule, a song under the breath, rhythms tapped on wood, stories exchanged in low voices after dark. These moments are not grand gatherings lit by romance. They are brief, improvised intervals of human connection squeezed between demands. That makes them more precious, not less. As evening comes, the light softens across the fields, and the colony seems to exhale. The day's heat loosens. Smoke rises in thin blue strands. Frogs start their patient music from the wet ground. You feel the ache in shoulders and calves that comes from standing, carrying, bending, waiting. Hands smell of wood, ash, and earth. Somewhere meat crackles over a fire, somewhere else. Someone sits very still, too tired even for speech. In this quieter hour, you can sense the unfinished quality of Virginia's social order. It wants certainty. It wants neat categories that justify control. It wants black labour without black claims, black presence without black rights, black family life without legal protection, black faith without spiritual equality. Yet the colony has not fully solved every contradiction. That is why the moment feels so tense. The people in power are moving toward a system they believe will answer all these inconvenient human complexities by flattening them. You stand in the deepening dusk and realize that daily life here is shaped not only by what the law already says, but by what powerful people hope it will soon say more clearly. That hope presses down on ordinary routines, on cooking, on prayer, on child rearing, on rest, on naming, on touch. For black Americans in this unsettled colony, every ordinary act takes place inside an argument about personhood. The stars begin to show one by one above the tree line. The river darkens to ink. A breeze passes over the skin with a brief coolness that feels almost tender. Then the night settles in, carrying the smells of marsh water, smoke, and trampled grass. Around you, life continues in its fragile, watchful form, not free, not secure, but still unmistakably human, even in a place working so hard to deny it. By midday, the Virginia air feels thick enough to lean against, warm and damp and faintly sweet with tobacco sap. The ground holds the morning's moisture, but the sun has begun its steady punishment. You walk toward a clearing near the courthouse, where the colony's future is being arranged in language so dry and official that it almost disguises the damage. Almost. Papers shift on a table. A clerk dips his pen. A man clears his throat with grave importance, as though the fate of generations were merely an administrative inconvenience before dinner. This is the strange power of law in a young colony. It can sound tidy while remaking human lives. It can hide violence inside grammar. And in 1662, Virginia's lawmakers make one of the most fateful choices in the history of black life in English North America. They decide that a child's legal condition will follow that of the mother. In the polished phrasing of the colony, this may seem technical. In lived reality, it is devastatingly clear. If a mother is enslaved, her child will be enslaved too. You feel the force of that decision not in the room itself, but outside it, in the cabins, yards, kitchens, lofts, and fields where black women live and work. in the arms of mothers carrying infants, in the anxious calculations of families whose future has just been narrowed by design. The law does not simply describe the world, it creates incentives, permissions, and expectations. It gives planters a reason to see black women's childbearing not as family life, but as an extension of property. A mainstream fact sits at the heart of this moment. The 1662 Virginia law made hereditary slavery pass through the mother, reversing the usual English common law assumption that status followed the father. That change was not random. It suited a colony invested in labour, inheritance, and control. It also helped protect white men from legal complications if they fathered children with enslaved women. The child would remain in bondage, and the property claim would stay secure. Convenient, is it not? Grimly convenient. The courthouse does not smell dramatic. It smells of ink, damp wool, old wood, and men who have sat too long in warm rooms. But its decisions travel outward with astonishing force. You can almost imagine the words themselves moving across the plantations like invisible threads, tightening around mothers and children. A law can be silent when written and thunderous when applied. You step back into the open air and hear the ordinary sounds of the settlement. Axes in the distance, a dog barking once, then again. A bucket set down too hard. A baby crying from somewhere behind a row of rough buildings. That cry feels different now, more exposed, more terribly legible to power. For black women, the implications are immediate and brutal. Their labour is already demanded in fields, homes, kitchens, gardens, washing areas, and childcare. Their bodies are already treated as available to the colony in multiple ways. Now, the law adds another layer. Their children become a source of future labour that can be legally claimed from birth. Motherhood, in a free society, should enlarge the sense of personhood. Here it is being folded into the arithmetic of ownership. You watch a woman rock an infant in the shade beside a wall of sun-warmed timber. The baby's head rests against her shoulder. Her hand moves in a slow rhythm, firm and practiced. Sweat darkens the fabric at her back. Nearby, a pot simmers, giving off the smell of greens, ash and salt meat. It is a quiet domestic scene, intimate and ordinary. Yet the law now leans over it like a shadow. The child in her arms is not being seen first as a soul, or even simply as a child, but as a future labourer in a colony hungry for permanence. This legal turn reveals something ugly about Virginia's ambitions. Planters do not merely want workers. They want workers whose status will reproduce itself. They want a labour force that renews without negotiation. They want time to do the work that purchase and recruitment cannot do alone. The colony has discovered that one way to secure wealth is to make bondage hereditary and call it order. There is scholarly debate about precisely how lawmakers justified this shift in their own minds, because statutes are often brief while motives are sprawling. Some historians emphasize the problem of mixed ancestry children and the colony's desire to settle disputes over status. Others point more strongly to economic calculation and the growing racial logic of enslavement. The evidence supports both pressures, though the balance between them remains contested. In plain language, Virginia was solving several problems for itself at once, and none of the solutions favoured black families. The rule also exposes a deep hypocrisy. English law traditionally placed heavy weight on paternal lineage in matters of status and inheritance. Yet, when black enslavement and white male power intersected, the colony suddenly found maternal descent much more useful. Funny how principles become flexible when profit feels nervous. The lawmakers did not abandon legal reasoning. They redirected it, which is often far more dangerous. In the yards around the plantation houses, daily life continues under this new reality. Laundry is wrung by strong hands and hung where the breeze can reach it. Corn is pounded, water is hauled. A toddler totters unsteadily on bare feet across packed earth. Chickens scratch beside the doorway, deeply committed to their nonsense. But every ordinary act involving a child now carries a sharper weight. Birth itself has been harnessed to the labour system. You hear women speaking quietly while they work, their voices low and measured. Some words are practical: firewood, meal, water, fever, cloth. Other meanings travel beneath the surface, in pauses and tone. How do you raise a child in a world that has already assigned that child a status before speech, before memory, before choice? How do you offer tenderness while knowing the colony sees value where you feel love? Such questions may never be written in official records, but they saturate the human atmosphere of the place. The emotional violence of this law is easy to miss if you only read it on a page. Its wording is concise. Its consequences are endless. It tells black women that the state will reach through them into the next generation. It tells children that their condition can be fixed by ancestry before they take their first steps. It tells white planters that reproductive control is now part of economic planning. It tells the whole colony that slavery is no longer just a present arrangement. It is a future built into family life. There are odd details in the colony that make the contrast even sharper. Cradles may be handmade from rough wood, lined with scraps of cloth carefully saved from older garments. Teething babies chew smooth bits of leather or carved wood. Mothers use songs, humming, and gentle bouncing to soothe restless infants in the heavy evening heat. Small children might trail after older ones carrying tiny objects of great personal importance, like a spoon, a rag doll, or a feather found near the riverbank. These are universal scenes of care, yet here they unfold inside a system becoming expertly cruel. Touch matters in such a world. The coolness of a damp cloth on a child's forehead, the pressure of a hand guiding a small shoulder away from danger, the texture of braided hair under patient fingers, the warmth of a sleeping body carried from firelight to bed. You notice how much love is conveyed without ceremony, especially where law offers none. Human beings keep making families even when the state insists on treating those families as units of labour. Men, too, feel the consequences of the law, though not in the same bodily way. Fathers may love children they cannot legally protect. Some are separated from partners by sale, assignment, or household arrangement. Some live close by, some do not. In a society that refuses secure recognition to black family bonds, paternal care can become both deeply felt and painfully vulnerable. A father can teach, comfort, repair, joke, and worry, yet still remain legally powerless before the claims of an owner. The colony's obsession with inheritance makes this shift especially revealing. White Virginians care intensely about passing land, goods, and names through generations. They speak of lineage with reverence. They worry about heirs, dowries, legitimacy, and succession. But when the subject turns to black families, inheritance is redefined as bondage. One generation passes not land or legal standing, but enslavement itself. The double standard is not subtle. It is the architecture. You stand near a tobacco barn in the afternoon and hear the leaves rustle in the dim interior, dry and papery, like whispers that have lost patience. The air smells sharp, dusty, and oddly sweet. Outside, the heat presses down on shoulders and neck. A young child sits in the shade, tracing lines in the dirt with a stick, wholly absorbed in the important work of being small. Nearby, adults move through tasks with the measured pace of those conserving strength. The sight is simple. The structure around it is not. One fringe detail historians sometimes point out is how colonial legal change could spread through communities with uneven speed. Not everyone learned new statutes immediately. Literacy was limited. Distance mattered. Local enforcement varied. A law passed in the colonial government did not become lived reality in exactly the same way on every plantation at once. That does not lessen its importance. In some ways, it makes the process more chilling. People had to discover, gradually and concretely, that the future for their children had been claimed in writing. The psychological effect must have been profound. Anxiety changes the air of a place. It alters conversation, posture, sleep, and silence. You can imagine mothers looking at infants with fierce devotion sharpened by dread. You can imagine older children being drawn more tightly into the emotional circle of family because everyone senses how fragile that circle is. You can imagine planters seeing in those same children not innocence but inventory, the same body, two irreconcilable meanings. Some colonists likely told themselves this was simply practical governance. Colonies adore calling moral catastrophe practical. They would speak of clarity, stability, and settled expectations. They might even congratulate themselves for solving confusion, but confusion for whom? Not for the mothers whose children were now tied more firmly to slavery. Not for the children whose lives were narrowed before memory. The clarity served owners, and owners knew it. As evening approaches, the light turns amber across the yards and fields. Smoke rises from cooking fires in slow blue strands. The smell of boiling cornmeal drifts outward, plain and comforting. Insects begin their steady music from the grass. A woman lifts a child onto her hip with the ease of long habit. Another smooths a blanket laid over a sleeping form. Someone laughs softly at a small domestic mishap. The tenderness is real. So is the danger surrounding it. In this colony, law is reaching into the cradle. That is the truth of 1662. Slavery is no longer being shaped only through labour contracts, custom, or force in the present tense. It is being planted into descent. The future has been given a legal pathway that favours the expansion of bondage through black women and their children. The result is not only economic, it is intimate. It changes what birth means. The sky deepens toward blue-grey. Frogs call from the marsh. The last heat of the day lingers on the wood walls and packed earth. Slowly fading, in the near dark, a mother holds her child close, feeling the weight, the warmth, the steady breathing. The colony has written its claim in law. She answers, as parents do, with touch. For now, in this quiet moment, that touch is a kind of truth the courthouse cannot fully erase. The day begins before the sun is fully committed to rising, with the sky pale as watered milk and the ground still cool beneath your feet. A thin mist clings to the low places near the river, and every leaf seems to hold a bead of moisture. For one brief stretch, the plantation feels hushed. Then the sounds start. A gate thumps open. A rooster makes its overconfident announcement. Metal taps wood. Someone coughs in the half-dark. Work is awake now, and everyone else must follow. You move toward the fields with the others, and the smell reaches you first. Damp soil, crushed weeds, river air carrying a faint edge of salt and marsh rot. Then the sharper scent of tobacco itself, green and sticky and oddly sweet, as if the plant is trying to disguise how much suffering it demands. The crop fills the colony with wealth, and it drains the bodies of those forced to tend it. Tobacco is not simply planted, it is served. The labour begins with the kind of regularity that makes it feel older than the people performing it. Hands lift hoes, baskets, knives, and bundles. Feet sink slightly into ground that never stays clean for long. Shirts cling early in the day. The light grows stronger. So does the heat. For black Americans trapped in Virginia's labour system, the field is not an occasional burden. It is the shape of the day, the ruler by which exhaustion is measured. A mainstream fact defines nearly everything around you. Tobacco cultivation in colonial Virginia was intensely labour-hungry. It required clearing land, preparing soil, planting seedlings, weeding, topping, worming, cutting, curing, sorting, and packing. Every stage depended on human effort. As planters sought larger harvests, they sought tighter control over workers. The crop and the labour regime grew together, each making the other harsher. You watch the lines of workers bend and straighten, under a sun that seems personally offended by human comfort. The rhythm becomes almost hypnotic. Pull the weed, check the leaves, step forward, repeat. Hours pass in motion so familiar they sink into muscle and bone. Yet there is nothing easy about them. The back stiffens, fingers grow sore, neck and shoulders begin to burn where fabric does not fully cover the skin. Mud cakes around ankles, then dries, then cracks. The fields themselves are not silent. Tobacco leaves rasp against one another in the breeze with a papery whisper. Insects drone steadily, filling the air with a sound that becomes part of thought itself. Birds call from the trees at the edge of the clearing. Farther away, an axe strikes wood with dull rhythm. Closer by, an overseer's voice cuts through everything, sharp and watchful, reminding everyone that labour here is never just labour. It is monitored effort. Children are present too, not always doing the heaviest tasks, but rarely free from the world of work. They carry water, gather small items, chase off pests, fetch tools, and learn quickly how to stay out of certain pathways of anger. A child on a plantation learns to read tone as carefully as words, the shuffle of approaching boots, the clipped way a name is spoken, the silence that falls before punishment. None of this is written into a lesson book. It is simply absorbed. The touch of the day changes as it goes on. At dawn, the air rests cool on the arms. By late morning, it presses against the skin like warm cloth. By afternoon, it becomes a weight. Sweat stings the eyes. Dust clings to the legs. The handle of a hoe grows slick with use. A shirt that began dry now rubs at the shoulders and underarms. Even the breeze can feel hot, carrying not relief but more breath from the land itself. Meals are brief and practical. A pause, not a rest. Cornbread, perhaps. Salted meat in small measure. A drink of water or something thin and sour that passes for refreshment. You sit where shade can be found, if shade can be found, and hear the small noises of eating, chewing, a swallow, someone clear in a throat. The body takes what it can get and asks for more than the world intends to provide. There is a certain bitter absurdity in the way planters admire a good crop. They can stand at the edge of a field, hands behind their backs, speaking with satisfaction about yield and quality, as though the tobacco rose from the earth out of respect for their opinions. Meanwhile, dozens of tired bodies have bent, carried, cut, and endured to make that admiration possible. Colonial self-congratulation is often just exploitation wearing a polite hat. The work itself changes with the plant's growth. Young tobacco must be set carefully. Later it must be weeded so other growth does not steal the soil's strength. Worms are picked from leaves by hand. Flowers are removed to force energy back into the leaf. Every task asks for attention. Every mistake matters because planters insist it matters. In a crop economy, detail becomes discipline. You notice the smell of the leaves on workers' hands. Green, sticky, almost oily. It lingers even after water touches the skin. When plants are handled in quantity, the body seems to carry the field with it. Tobacco dust settles into clothes. Bits of leaf cling to cuffs and hems. The work follows people home. If home is even the right word for a place one does not control, once the leaves are cut, labour does not lessen, it changes direction. Plants must be carried, hung, and cured in barns where the air grows close and stale. Inside one of these structures, you feel the temperature shift at once. It is dim, dusty, and fragrant with drying leaf. The hanging plants create narrow passages, and the smell is thick enough to taste. You hear rope creak. Boards complain softly under weight, and somewhere above you, a trapped insect throws itself against wood. Scholars continue to debate how closely the earliest plantation labour routines in Virginia resemble those of later, more systematized slave societies. The records show brutality and coercion early on, but they do not always reveal the exact degree of standardization in every place. What is clear is the direction of change. Labour is becoming more organised, more racialised, and more fully tied to lifetime control. Even where details vary, the pressure is unmistakable. The pace of field life also depends on the weather, which is both ordinary fact and constant menace. Rain can soften the soil or ruin a plan. Drought can shrink hopes and tempers alike. Storms break branches, flood paths, and leave tools slick with mud. Summer heat lays itself over everything with punishing steadiness. Winter cold bites through poor clothing and cracks the skin at the knuckles. The body works anyway. The seasons are not merciful simply because people are tired. Some of the hardest work begins before the crop is even planted. Forests must be cut back, roots dragged, brush burned, stumps worked around or removed with stubborn effort. The smell of fresh-cut timber mixes with smoke and damp earth, creating the scent of a colony forever making and unmaking the same space. Land clearance is slow, punishing labour, and it expands the reach of plantation agriculture one aching day at a time. There are odd details here that reveal how physical this world is. People sometimes wrap bits of cloth or plant fibre around sore hands to keep working. Hats or kerchiefs are adjusted again and again against glare and sweat. A worker may keep a small personal tool in better condition than anything else they possess, because a sound blade or handle can mean the difference between manageable strain and true misery. The body becomes practical in all sorts of uncelebrated ways. For black women, the Labour Day often stretches beyond the field. They may weed, plant, or carry alongside men, then return to cooking, washing, mending, tending children, and keeping domestic routines alive under impossible conditions. The field does not excuse the hearth, and the hearth does not excuse the field. It is a double burden, though burden sounds far too mild for such relentless demand. You notice how people conserve motion when they can, a turn of the wrist kept efficient, a step shortened to save strength, a load balanced against the hip just so. Experience teaches the body how to endure, though endurance is not the same thing as consent. There is intelligence in these adjustments, a practical wisdom formed under pressure. The plantation profits from it while pretending it is simply natural labour. Late in the afternoon, the light grows heavier and more golden, and fatigue settles over the workers like another layer of clothing. Speech, never abundant in the field, becomes even rarer. Breath is kept for the body. The soundscape changes too. Insects seem louder. Leaves brush and click somewhere nearby. A mule stamps its foot and snorts. A cartwheel bumps over ruts with a hollow wooden groan. And still there are the watchers, overseers, stewards, masters, and others who move through the labour scene with authority reinforced by custom and threat. Their presence changes posture, it changes timing, it changes the amount of risk a person can take even in something as small as pausing for 2 extra breaths. On plantations, power is measured not only in punishment delivered, but in anticipation created. There are moments, however, when the people in the field make tiny spaces inside the day, a glance that carries humour, a muttered observation too soft for the wrong ears, a songline half-spoken and not repeated, a pause near the water bucket that lasts a heartbeat longer than necessary. These are not dramatic acts. They are fragments of self-possession in a world determined to claim every minute. Small things matter when almost nothing is yours. As evening approaches, tools are gathered with motions slowed by fatigue. The sky softens, streaked with dusty gold and fading blue. The fields that looked sharp and demanding at noon now seem blurred by distance and low light. Smoke begins to rise from cooking fires. The smell of supper drifts outward, humble and thin but welcome. Shoulders lower a little, not because life has become easy, only because the day's most public labour is ending. Yet work does not disappear with sunset. Leaves may still need turning, fires need tending, clothes need rinsing, children need feeding and calming. The body remains busy after it is already spent, You feel the ache in calves, wrists, and lower back, the deep tiredness that settles not just in muscle but behind the eyes. The plantation has a way of taking even the shape of your thoughts and making them heavy. In the near dark, you stand at the edge of a tobacco field and breathe in the mingled scents of earth, ash, leaf, and river damp. Frogs begin their steady chorus from the low ground. A breeze finally moves across your skin with something close to kindness. Behind you, someone lifts a pot lid. Ahead of you, the rows of plants fade into shadow. The day has been full of motion, supervision, and strain. It has also been full of skill, endurance, and a kind of discipline the colony never deserved to command. This is what the labour system of Virginia is becoming in 1662. Not just hard work, though it is certainly that. Not just long hours, though they are relentless. It is an entire landscape arranged to convert black energy into wealth for others, field by field, task by task, season by season. The colony is learning how to make exhausting labour seem ordinary. The leaves dry in their barns, the ships wait at the rivers, the profits travel outward, and in the fading light, the people who made it all possible carry their tired bodies home through the smell of smoke and evening grass. Evening settles over the plantation with a softness the daylight never grants. The sky turns from pale gold to muted violet, and the first stars tremble above the tree line. Smoke from cooking fires drifts low and slow, carrying the smells of cornmeal, wood ash, and something salted warming in a pot. The ground, still holding the day's heat, feels firm beneath your feet. For a little while, the air loosens, shoulders drop, voices stay low. The world seems to whisper instead of command. This is the hour when people try to gather themselves back from the day. A mother washes a child's face with a damp cloth. A man sits on a rough stool and rubs his palms, feeling the burn left by tools and rope. Someone mends a tear in a shirt by firelight. Squinting through smoke and dimness, a baby stirs, then settles against a chest. These are small domestic acts, almost invisible from the outside. Yet they are where so much of life truly happens. Not in the official records, not in the planter's ledger. Here, in the work of keeping each other human. For Black Americans in Virginia, home is never fully secure, even when it exists in the deepest emotional sense. A cabin may hold affection, memory, and routine, but it does not hold legal protection. A family can be formed by devotion, by daily care, by shared hardship, by love that grows in the cracks of an unkind world. The colony, however, often refuses to honour that family as binding. This refusal turns ordinary tenderness into something fragile and endangered. A mainstream historical truth shapes everything in this quiet hour. Enslaved families in colonial Virginia lived under the constant threat of separation through sale, inheritance, debt settlement, labour transfer, or the whim of owners. Even where people formed lasting bonds, the law didn't reliably recognise or protect those ties. Family life existed, but it did so under pressure that could strike at any moment. You feel that pressure in the way people speak about one another. A woman may refer to a man as her husband in practice, in feeling, in shared responsibility, even if the colony offers no legal weight to that word. A child may know exactly who belongs to the family and who offers comfort at night. Regardless of whether a court or church would record the bond, kinship here is built in lived reality, not guaranteed status. That makes it no less real. It makes it more vulnerable. Inside a small dwelling, the firelight glows orange against rough walls. The room smells of smoke, damp wood, worn fabric, and the faint sweetness of stored corn. A sleeping pallet lies in one corner, padded with straw or coarse stuffing beneath a blanket that has seen better years. A pot hangs near the embers. A spoon rests on a shelf worn smooth by touch. None of it is grand. All of it matters. The smallest possessions can carry enormous emotional weight in a life where ownership is denied in larger ways. Touch becomes its own language here. A hand steadying a child by the elbow, fingers untangling hair at the end of the day, someone pressing a folded cloth into another's palm, a shoulder leaned against a door frame while two people share a few quiet words. These gestures may look ordinary, but they are full of meaning in a world designed to scatter people. Affection often travels without ceremony, because ceremony is a luxury the colony does not reliably allow. You notice how people create familiarity through repetition, meals at similar hours, when possible, a certain place near the fire where someone always sits, a lullaby hummed in the same rhythm each night, a story told softly to calm a restless child. Domestic life depends on pattern, and pattern offers comfort. When the wider world is unstable, repeated little habits begin to feel like shelter, yet the danger never goes far. At any time, an owner may decide to sell a person, transfer them to another property, divide a household in an estate settlement, or punish a family by forcing separation. You can sense this uncertainty in the emotional caution that sometimes shadows tenderness. People love fully, but they also know loss may come not by death alone, but by decision. That kind of knowledge changes the quality of daily life. It sharpens joy. It deepens dread. Historians still argue over how often enslaved family units in early Virginia remained together for extended periods, because the records can reveal transactions more clearly than lasting domestic bonds. Sale documents survive. Emotional continuity often does not. Some evidence suggests many families created enduring relationships despite the risks. Other evidence shows disruption was frequent and brutal. Both realities likely coexisted, depending on owners, place, and circumstance. Children feel this uncertainty keenly, even when adults try to soften it. A child notices when voice is lower after an owner's name is mentioned. A child notices when a mother's expression tightens at the sight of a stranger on horseback. A child notices when someone who was present last week is no longer there. In such a world, absence becomes one of the earliest lessons. Not every departure is explained. Not every question receives an answer. Even so, family life generates warmth that the system cannot fully erase. You hear laughter as a child repeats some small mischief from earlier in the day. You see an older person showing a younger one how to fold cloth properly, or how to scrape a bowl clean, or how to listen for weather in the trees. You watch someone save the best bite from a plain meal for another person without making a show of it. Love here is often practical. It feeds, steadies, teaches, and remembers. There are quirky details in this domestic world that reveal how people make do. A cradle might be suspended in a way that allows it to rock with a foot, while hands remain busy at another task. A rag doll may be fashioned from scraps too worn for clothing. A broken cup might be kept for years because it still holds enough to matter. Small objects gather importance simply because so little can be taken for granted. Necessity turns humble things into treasures. The colony's legal indifference to black family bonds is especially cruel because white Virginians care intensely about their own households. They speak proudly of inheritance, marriage, lineage, and household order. They worry over heirs, property transmission, respectable unions, and the future of their names. Yet when black families build their own domestic ties, the same society often treats those bonds as incidental. It is a remarkable feat of moral gymnastics. Very energetic, very ugly, and unfortunately quite effective. Marriage itself sits in an uneasy place. Some enslaved or bound people form committed partnerships recognized by their communities, by shared life, and sometimes informally by owners or clergy. But such unions lack the stable legal standing that might protect spouses from forced separation. A vow may be heartfelt, a household may be lovingly made. None of that guarantees it will be left intact. Law, in this setting, is much more interested in labour and ownership than in the sanctity of black domestic life. Night deepens around the cabins and the soundscape changes. Crickets take over where daytime birds left off. Frogs thrum from the marsh. The occasional creak of timber marks someone shifting indoors. A low murmur carries through a doorway, followed by a soft laugh, then silence again. Smoke clings to clothes and hair. The air against your skin feels cooler now, finally easing the day's heat. It should be a peaceful time. Sometimes it almost is. Parents use these hours to pass down what they can: a name, a warning, a cooking method, a prayer, a memory shaped carefully enough to survive retelling. Knowledge travels in the home more quietly than in public spaces, but perhaps more powerfully too. How to behave when anger enters a room. How to hide feeling when necessary. How to save a little food. How to keep dignity in the posture of the body. These are not lessons anyone chooses to teach in a just world. Here they are essential. The emotional burden on mothers can be especially heavy. They must comfort children while living under the constant possibility that those children may be sold, punished, or claimed more completely by the labour system as they grow. They must create a sense of safety without being able to promise it. That is one of the cruelest demands any society can make, to ask for reassurance from people denied the power to secure it. Men, too, carry a particular pain. They may repair roofs, chop wood, hold infants, offer guidance, and build every visible sign of family responsibility, yet remain unable to protect loved ones from sale or transfer. Strength in such a place can feel heartbreakingly incomplete. A father may do everything expected of love and still stand helpless before an owner's decision. Powerlessness does not cancel devotion. It makes devotion more poignant. You see how people build belonging anyway. A place by the hearth becomes someone's usual seat. A cup is passed to the same hands first. Certain words become familiar terms of affection. A child falls asleep most quickly to one specific voice. Shared life forms patterns, and patterns become memory. Family is not only declared, it is enacted, night after night, in these repeating arrangements of care. One scholarly uncertainty involves the degree to which African kinship traditions survived intact under such pressure, or adapted into new forms in colonial Virginia. The evidence suggests both continuity and transformation. Some naming practices, child-rearing rhythms, healing knowledge, and social obligations likely carried traces of African worlds. At the same time, the violence of enslavement and displacement forced people to reshape family life creatively. What emerged was neither untouched survival nor total erasure, but something living and adaptive. Near one doorway, you catch the smell of herbs hanging to dry, sharp and green even in the dark. Inside another cabin, someone gently scrapes a pot, gathering the last edible bits with care that suggests every spoonful counts. A child's sleepy complaint rises and falls. An older woman hums in a tone so steady it feels like another form of breathing. The whole scene rests on effort. Comfort here is not given. It is made, pieced together from labour and love. Then there is the fear of inheritance, not in the comforting sense of family continuity, but in the cold colonial sense of people being listed among goods. A planter dies, and an estate may be divided. Names are placed beside values. Human beings become entries in a transaction. A family that has weathered ordinary hardship can be broken by paperwork. The cruelty is bureaucratic, which somehow makes it worse. No raised voice is required when ink can do the damage. And still, despite everything, domestic life refuses to vanish. People continue to care for one another in ways both visible and subtle. They continue to braid hair, share food, ease fevers, tell stories, comfort the frightened, and claim kin where the law refuses to see it. This persistence is not sentimental, it is disciplined, it is daily. It is one of the most important truths of black life in this era. Family bonds endure not because the colony supports them, but because people insist on making them anyway. The fire burns lower, shadows soften around the room. Outside, the night air carries the smell of wet grass and cooling earth. Someone wraps a blanket more tightly around a child already half asleep. Somewhere close by, two adults speak in murmurs so low the words disappear, leaving only tone. The day's labour has ended, but the deeper work of keeping a household alive continues in gestures small enough to escape official notice. That is the paradox of home in Virginia in 1662. It is precious because it is insecure. It is intimate because it is threatened. It is built in spaces the law does not honour, yet it remains one of the strongest forces in people's lives. Around you, cabins glow faintly in the dark, each one holding its own fragile circle of warmth. The colony may deny those circles any lasting protection, but tonight, for a few quiet hours under the rising stars, they still hold. Sunday morning arrives with a slower rhythm, though not a softer one. The bells do not ring grandly here, if they ring at all, but the day carries a different posture. People wash where they can. Clothing is straightened and retied. Faces are wiped free of sleep and soot. The air smells of wet grass, river mist, and the faint sour trace of last night's ashes. For a few hours, the colony wants to imagine itself orderly, pious, and properly governed. It likes that image very much. It is less interested in deserving it. You walk toward a small church set on uneven ground, its wooden boards weathered by rain and heat. The building is plain, practical, and slightly stern, much like the people who claim to speak for God inside it. Shoes scrape the threshold. A door groans on its hinges. Bodies press into benches that feel too narrow and too hard. The room smells of damp wool, old timber, candle wax, and breath held too long in still air. A baby fusses. Someone clears a throat. Then the minister begins, and the room settles into the long, slow theatre of colonial righteousness. For black Americans in Virginia, the church and the courthouse are not separate worlds. They are neighbouring instruments of order, each using different language to shape the same social reality. One speaks of sin, obedience, and salvation. The other speaks of property, status, and inheritance. Between them, a colony teaches itself how to justify domination with a steady face. Religion blesses hierarchy. Law enforces it. The two can work together with rather alarming efficiency. A mainstream historical fact sits at the centre of this tension. In 17th century Virginia, baptism did not reliably free enslaved people, despite older assumptions some might have hoped to invoke. Over time, colonial authorities moved to make it clear that Christian conversion would not alter a person's bondage. This mattered deeply because religion might otherwise have created legal ambiguity. The colony preferred clarity when clarity protected ownership. That preference is visible even in the tone of preaching. The minister speaks of duty, humility, and the God-given structure of the world. He warns against disorder with special enthusiasm, which is often how powerful people describe any condition in which they are not in charge. Scripture flows from the pulpit in measured phrases. Some listeners hear comfort, others hear command. Still others listen in silence, aware that sacred words can be used like tools and not always gentle ones. You can feel the complexity of the moment in the bodies gathered there. Black men and women may attend under expectation, pressure, curiosity, or genuine conviction. Some may be baptized, some may carry Christian names alongside older names or private memories not spoken aloud. Some may find real spiritual meaning in the stories they hear, especially the ones about suffering, justice, and deliverance. Faith does not belong entirely to the people in charge, no matter how confidently they speak. Once a story enters human hearts, it begins to travel in directions authority cannot fully predict. The church interior grows warm as the service continues. Light slips through small windows in pale strips, catching floating dust. A child shifts against a parent's side. A woman folds and unfolds her hands in her lap. The bench presses uncomfortably against your back. Somewhere close by. Linen rustles softly as someone adjusts a sleeve. The sermon keeps going, because colonial sermons consider brevity a suspicious modern weakness. Rest assured, no one here is in danger of leaving spiritually undercooked. Outside, the courthouse waits with a different kind of solemnity. It is not holier, only drier. Yet both spaces depend on ritual. The church has prayers, scripture, and sacraments. The courthouse has petitions, depositions, and rulings. Each performs authority by speaking aloud in formal tones. Each turns human complexity into categories. Each claims to know where people belong. For Black Virginians, small ambiguities once existed in this overlap between custom, religion, and law. Could a baptized African claim some altered status? Could English Christian norms complicate perpetual bondage? Could local habit create a narrow opening where written law remained unsettled? These questions were not fanciful. In an earlier, less codified colony, status could sometimes appear inconsistent or negotiable in particular cases. That inconsistency did not amount to justice, but it left room for contest. Scholars still debate how much real hope baptism ever offered in practical terms, because evidence varies from place to place and across decades. Some historians argue that Christian status may have carried more uncertainty in the earlier 17th century than later law would allow. Others caution that planters were already moving decisively toward racialized lifetime bondage long before every legal detail was nailed down. The uncertainty lies less in whether oppression existed and more in how quickly each possible loophole was sealed. You step into the courthouse on another day and notice the change at once. The air feels cooler and heavier. Ink stains fingers here instead of soil. Wood tables hold folded papers with an importance far out of proportion to their appearance. A clerk scratches lines onto a page while a man nearby waits with his hat in his hands. The sound is not the swell of preaching, but the dry scratch of administration. A legal system can sound almost sleepy while doing terrible things. Cases involving black people move through this world in fragments. A dispute over service, a question of status, a matter of punishment, a petition, a testimony. Each individual case may look narrow, almost trivial, when isolated on paper. But together they reveal a colony trying to define black life more strictly. The goal is not simply to resolve uncertainty. It is to reduce flexibility where flexibility might interfere with labour control. One of the colony's more revealing habits is the way it borrows English legal language while quietly reshaping it for colonial convenience. English common law carries traditions about inheritance, legitimacy, and social standing. Virginia does not abandon those traditions outright. It selects from them, adjusts them, and sidesteps them whenever necessary to make slavery more secure. Law becomes a kind of tailoring service for power. The fit is not elegant, but it gets the job done. Religion can be similarly selective. A minister may insist that all souls are equal before God, then support a social system that plainly treats some bodies as hereditary property. He may preach charity while ignoring coercion outside the church door. He may urge moral reform among the poor while dining comfortably with the wealthy men who depend on forced labour. Human beings are endlessly inventive when arranging their consciences. Colonial Virginia proves this with dreary consistency. Still, faith can offer Black Americans certain forms of community and meaning that the wider system cannot entirely control. Shared worship, however constrained, creates occasions for gathering. Biblical stories can resonate in unexpected ways. The image of captivity, exile, endurance, and divine judgment carries force in a world built on domination. A sermon intended to teach submission may also sharpen inward questions. If God sees all, then what exactly is he seeing here? That question does not disappear just because the minister avoids it. There are quieter details too. A woman smoothing the front of a child's shirt before entering the church. A man pausing outside to brush dust from his sleeves with deliberate care. A whispered explanation of a prayer to someone younger. The small pride of appearing orderly in a place that often denies dignity. Clothing may be patched, shoes may be worn thin, the building may be drafty and plain, yet people still arrive with intention. Presentation matters when so much else is controlled by others. The courthouse has its own rituals of appearance, hats removed, bodies arranged in deference, voices lowered before officials. A person may stand before the bench with every gesture watched and interpreted. For black people, especially, demeanour can become part of survival. Too bold may be read as insolence. Too hesitant may be taken as weakness or guilt. Even posture becomes political in a room where power rests on unequal assumptions. One fringe detail from colonial life is how dependent legal institutions were on memory and local reputation in a world with limited paperwork and uneven record-keeping. People knew one another's names, kin ties, labour value, religious standing, and scandalous behaviour through networks of gossip as much as through formal documentation. In such a setting, reputation could shape judgment in surprising ways. That made the legal system not only harsh, but deeply personal. The boundary between church and court also blurs in matters of sex, marriage, and legitimacy. White colonial authorities care intensely about lawful marriage and inheritance within their own communities. At the same time, they tolerate or exploit relationships involving black women when those relationships benefit white men or leave property rights undisturbed. A child born to an enslaved woman can be absorbed into slavery regardless of the father's identity. The moral language of the church suddenly grows much quieter at precisely the moments when power is most comfortable. This is where the double standard becomes almost exhausting to observe. Chastity is preached, order is praised, marriage is honoured, yet none of these principles prevent the colony from arranging black family life around ownership rather than consent or permanence. The institution that speaks of sacred union and the institution that records human property are not enemies here. They are neighbours, nodding politely at each other across the lane. As the afternoon light slants across the settlement, you hear the day thinning into quieter sounds. A cartwheel rolls over hard ground. Geese complain near the water in tones suggesting they disapprove of everything, which in fairness may be the wisest position available. The church stands empty now, smelling faintly of candle smoke and breath. The courthouse door is shut, its papers stacked inside, but their work continues beyond their walls. For black Americans, the effects of these institutions reach into daily routines. A baptized person remains vulnerable to sale. A family recognized by affection may still lack legal standing. A dispute settled in court may reinforce bondage rather than relieve it. A child taught to pray is still a child the colony may claim as property. Sacred and legal authority do not cancel oppression. They often help make it feel official. And yet official power is never total in the inward life. A prayer whispered privately can hold meanings no minister intended. A courthouse ruling can settle a status while failing to settle the conscience of the people living under it. Black communities preserve dignity in forms that do not depend entirely on recognition from church or court. Care, memory, naming, and mutual knowledge continue under the surface of formal institutions. The evening air cools at last, touching the skin with welcome relief after the day's closeness. Shadows lengthen across the grass. The smell of supper begins to rise from scattered cabins, simple and familiar. Somewhere nearby, a child repeats a phrase heard in church without fully understanding it. An older voice answers gently, changing the tone if not the words. That is how life often works in this colony. Official messages arrive from above. Meaning is remade below. So you stand between the church and the courthouse, those two wooden stages of colonial authority, and see them for what they are. One wraps power in holiness, the other wraps it in procedure. Both help Virginia become more confident in denying black people the protections it so eagerly claims for others. But beneath their language, another truth persists in quieter forms, carried in human memory, spiritual hunger, and the stubborn refusal to let official categories define the whole self. The morning comes heavy and warm, with clouds gathering low over the Virginia sky like wool pulled thin across a frame. The air smells of wet earth before the rain has even started, mixed with smoke from banked fires and the sharp green scent of crushed leaves underfoot. Somewhere nearby, water drips from a roof edge left damp by the night. The sound is slow and patient. Inside one of the cabins, a woman is already awake, though the day has barely begun, and her labour has already started before anyone has thought to name it. You notice quickly that black women in this colony carry a burden so layered it is almost difficult to describe without sounding breathless. Field labour, domestic work, childbearing, chilled rearing, food preparation, washing, mending, nursing the sick, enduring scrutiny, anticipating danger, and moving through a world that sees both their strength and their vulnerability as things to exploit. The colony depends on them at nearly every level. That dependence does not soften their treatment. It makes them more intensely used. A mainstream fact sits at the centre of their lives in 1662. Black women in Virginia were increasingly positioned at the heart of hereditary slavery, especially after the law fixing a child's status through the mother. This meant their labour mattered the plantation economy in the present, while their fertility was drawn into its future. Women were not only workers in the field or household, they became central to the colony's plan for reproducing bondage across generations. You feel this truth in the ordinary movement of the day. A woman lifts a water bucket and balances it with the practiced control of someone who has done this hundreds of times. Later, she bends over field rows, weeding or tending plants under a rising sun. Later still, she stirs a pot, washes cloth, quiets a crying child, and judges whether another child's cough sounds ordinary or ominous. Each task is treated as expected. None is treated as enough. The body is asked for more, then more again. The plantation landscape reveals this double demand everywhere. Near the main house, a woman may scrub linen or haul kitchen supplies while listening for orders from inside. In the fields, as other works beside men in the heat, her hands moving just as steadily through the crop. At the cabins, someone else coaxes a meal from limited stores while an infant shifts against her hip. The work changes shape, but not intensity. It simply keeps following. Touch defines much of this life. The roughness of wet cloth rubbed over a washboard, the pull of a child's fingers clutching at a sleeve, the ache in lower back and shoulders after hours of bending, the sting of sweat in the eyes, the heat of an iron pot handle wrapped in fabric, the softness of a sleeping baby's cheek against tired skin. These sensations fill the day, from morning until long after dark. Black women's knowledge is constant and undervalued. They know how long cornmeal must thicken. They know which herbs may soothe fever or stomach pain. They know how to calm a restless infant while still tending the fire. They know how to read a room before entering it. They know which moods in a white household signal danger. They know when silence protects more than speech. The colony profits from this intelligence while refusing to honour it as expertise. There is also the question of surveillance. Black women live under eyes that assess them for labour, obedience, sexuality, fertility, and usefulness all at once. White mistresses may watch for domestic performance. Overseers may watch for pace in the field. Masters may watch with a more predatory entitlement. Privacy is thin. Safety is thinner. A woman can be indispensable and still never secure. In fact, in this system, being indispensable often makes one more exposed. Historians still argue over the extent to which black women in early Virginia were assigned differently between field labour and household labour, compared with later plantation systems. The records suggest variation depending on wealth, region, crop demands, and the scale of the household. Some women spent long days in agricultural work, others were drawn more heavily into domestic service, many likely moved between both worlds. The uncertainty in the archive does not lessen the burden, it simply reminds you how many forms that burden could take. Pregnancy does not remove the demands of labour in any generous sense. A pregnant woman may continue working deep into the term, her steps more measured, her body carrying both fatigue and fragility, while others around her continue to count output. The colony sees her as a worker still, and increasingly as the bearer of future labour. That cold arithmetic hangs over the most intimate parts of life. A swelling belly, in a just world, should invite care. Here it may invite calculation. The cruelty of the system lies partly in this forced overlap between motherhood and exploitation. A woman may feel the first kick of a child while standing in a field row. She may quiet an infant between tasks. She may worry over a fever while also being expected to grind meal, scrub garments, and answer orders. The tenderness of maternal life is never allowed to exist apart from the pressures of coercion. Love and fear occupy the same space, sometimes the same breath. You can hear it in the rhythm of the cabins at night. A child whimpers, a mother hums, another woman whispers advice about teething, rash, or trouble sleeping. Someone stirs ashes to keep a little heat alive till dawn. The sounds are soft, but the labour behind them is unending. Care work does not stop when field work ends. It deepens. Women hold together the fragile world of food, warmth, and reassurance after the visible workday is done. There are stranger details that reveal the material reality of this labour. Cloth for menstrual care or infant wrapping must be washed and reused carefully because fabric is valuable. Hair must be managed with limited tools, often by hand, by memory, and by patience. Children may be soothed with carved objects, knotted scraps, or songs that have crossed oceans in altered form. A woman may keep a small bundle of herbs hidden from casual eyes because knowledge itself can be a private resource. Tiny practical acts become part of survival. The white households around them often rely heavily on black women's skill while pretending dependency does not exist. Meals appear, floors are swept, linen is cleaned, children are watched, illness is tended, fires are kept. The daily order of colonial life rests on labour that white Virginians frequently describe as inferior, even while depending on it completely. The contradiction is astonishing only if you expect consistency from a slave society, which would be a rather optimistic mistake. Sexual vulnerability adds another layer of dread. Black women could be subjected to coercion by white men who face little legal consequence and often no social disgrace at all, provided property arrangements remained convenient. The colony's rules did not protect black women's bodily autonomy in any meaningful modern sense. Instead, the law often worked around violations to preserve ownership and status. This is one of the bleakest truths of the era, and it sits behind the polite language of household order like rot behind painted wood. The 1662 rule about maternal status made that vulnerability even more consequential. If a child inherited the mother's condition, then children born to enslaved women remained in bondage regardless of the father's identity. That legal structure insulated white men from obligations while preserving labour claims for owners. The system could absorb exploitation without threatening itself. It was cruel and efficient, which is a terrible combination in any society. You stand near a cooking area in the late afternoon and smell onions, wood smoke, and damp clay. A woman kneels to adjust a pot, her movements quick and exact despite the weight of the day in her shoulders. Beside her, a child dozes against a folded blanket. Another tugs at the hem of her garment with the urgent seriousness only children can bring to very small needs. She responds to each demand almost without pause. Stir, turn, lift, soothe, watch, continue. It is like seeing several kinds of labour happen in a single body at once. There is deep skill in how women shape nourishment from limited means. Cornmeal can become several things depending on water, heat, timing, and what may be added, greens can be made more filling with fat or scraps when any can be spared. Fish can be cleaned, salted, or stretched. A meal does not emerge from the pot by luck. It comes from judgment, memory, and adaptation. Feeding others in scarcity is an art form rarely honoured by the powerful. Women also carry social memory, names of kin, births, pairings, illnesses, quiet grievances, the exact way someone liked a broth when sick, the lullaby that calms one child faster than another, the story that should not be told near certain ears. This kind of memory knits households together. In places where the law refuses to preserve black family life, women often become the living archive of it. Scholarly uncertainty remains around how much African cultural practice shaped women's daily routines in Virginia during this period, especially in childbirth, childcare, healing, and food preparation. The evidence suggests both retention and adaptation, but details are often hard to recover from colonial records. What survives most clearly is not a pure untouched tradition, but the creativity with which women preserved usable fragments of older worlds while navigating the demands of a brutal new one. You can see that creativity in small choices, a seasoning that reflects remembered taste, a swaddling method learned from another woman, a healing poultice prepared in a pattern not taught by English books, a rhythm used to rock a child. None of these things overturn the system, yet they preserve personhood within it. They say, quietly but firmly, that life is more than the colony's categories. Even relationships among women matter enormously here. Advice is exchanged while washing, cooking, carrying, or tending children. Warnings are shared in low voices. Help may come in small practical forms: a held baby, a passed cup, an extra pair of hands with a task. Solidarity does not need speeches. Sometimes it looks like someone noticing you are near your limit and stepping in before you ask. By dusk, the body shows the day's cost. Hands smell of smoke, food, river water, and labour. Feet ache from standing. Arms feel hollowed out with fatigue. And still a woman may be the one to settle the children, bank the fire, check the pot one last time, and lie down last. The colony treats this effort as natural, as though women simply generate endless reserves from the air. In truth, what looks like endless strength is often disciplined endurance under conditions no one should have to bear. The sky darkens slowly, clouds thinning enough to reveal a few stars. Crickets begin their steady chorus. The night air finally cools your skin, though the warmth of the day lingers in the wood walls and packed ground. Inside the cabin, a woman leans over a sleeping child and adjusts the blanket with careful fingers. It is a small movement, almost nothing. Yet in that touch you can feel the whole contradiction of her life. She is pressed into labour, watched, used, and endangered by the colony. And still she creates warmth, care, food, memory, and continuity. That is what makes black women so central to Virginia in 1662, not because the colony sees them clearly, but because it uses them everywhere while fearing what it cannot fully control in them. Their work sustains the plantation. Their bodies are drawn into the legal future of slavery. Their care holds families together under pressure. Their knowledge quietly enlarges the lives around them. The system tries to reduce them to function. They continue, stubbornly and profoundly, and to be more than that. Night offers cover, though never complete safety. The darkness spreads slowly across the Virginia landscape, pooling first beneath the trees and along the riverbank, then filling the spaces between cabins, sheds, and barns. The air smells of cooling earth, damp grass, marsh water, and the last thin smoke from evening fires. Crickets pulse in the weeds, frogs answer from the low ground. A plank creaks somewhere close, followed by stillness. In this colony, even quiet has to be handled carefully. You begin to understand that resistance here does not always arrive in dramatic gestures. There are no trumpets, No grand speeches from a hilltop. More often, resistance is folded into the ordinary fabric of survival. It is hidden in timing, tone, movement, memory, and refusal. It is a person keeping hold of an inner self the system cannot fully reach. It is a small decision that preserves energy, knowledge, kinship, or dignity in a world designed to drain them all away. A mainstream historical truth lies beneath these quieter acts. Enslaved and bound black people in colonial Virginia resisted in many ways, including running away, slowing work, feigning illness, preserving family bonds, sharing information, maintaining cultural practices, and negotiating daily life with great care. Resistance did not have to overthrow the system to matter. Often it meant reducing harm, protecting others, or keeping a piece of autonomy alive. The plantation day trains people to obey visible rhythms, but night creates narrower openings. A whispered conversation near a doorway can carry news from another property. Someone may mention a recent punishment, a change in the owner's mood, the arrival of a ship, or the rumour of a road, creek, or settlement farther inland. Information matters because power thrives on isolation. To know even a little more than the system expects can be useful. Sometimes it can be life-saving. You hear voices kept low and even, not because nothing important is being said, but because it is. A name, a place, a warning, a possibility. Children asleep nearby breathe softly beneath blankets, while adults shape words with great care. The night air touches your skin with welcome coolness after the heat of the day, yet the body stays alert. At any moment, footsteps may approach, a door may open, a wrong ear may catch the wrong phrase. In such a world, caution becomes part of the grammar of resistance. One of the simplest forms of defiance is the management of labour itself. An overseer wants speed, precision, and visible effort. A worker may offer enough to avoid immediate punishment while quietly conserving strength. A task can be slowed slightly, a motion can be made more deliberate, a tool can be searched for a little longer than necessary. These acts are rarely spectacular. They are not meant to be. They are meant to reclaim fragments of the body from total extraction. Colonial authorities often described such behaviour as laziness or disobedience, which is a convenient interpretation if one wishes never to examine the conditions producing it. In reality, work slowdowns and subtle non-compliance can be rational acts in a brutal system. When your labour is being taken by force, efficiency is not always a virtue. Sometimes inefficiency is one of the few available choices. You notice how much of this resistance depends on reading people accurately. Who notices missing minutes? Who punishes hardest? Who drinks too much by evening? Who can be distracted? Who enjoys cruelty for its own sake? Black Virginians must become skilled observers of personality because survival depends on forecasting danger. That attentiveness is a form of intelligence sharpened under pressure, and it shapes almost every small act of resistance. There are more direct acts too. Running away, even briefly, is one of the clearest rejections of bondage. Some flee for a night, some for several days, some try for permanent escape toward native communities, remote woods, towns, or other colonies. The landscape itself plays a role here. Rivers can guide and betray. Forests can conceal and confuse. Marshes can hide footsteps while swallowing strength. Escape is dangerous, uncertain, and often desperate. Still, the attempt says something powerful. It says the imposed order is not accepted inwardly, even when it cannot be safely challenged in daylight. Historians still debate how often short-term absences should be read as full escape attempts rather than temporary withdrawals for rest, kin contact, or relief from punishment. The records usually come from owners, courts, or notices, and those records reflect the fears of the powerful more clearly than the intentions of the absent. What is clear is that movement without permission alarmed the colony. Even a brief disappearance threatened the fantasy of total control. Resistance can also live in cultural persistence. a song hummed while working, a rhythm tapped with fingers against a bucket or doorframe, a naming practice carried in memory, a cooking method kept alive through habit rather than formal instruction, a healing remedy passed from one person to another. These things may look small from the outside. They are not. They preserve worlds of meaning that enslavement tries to flatten. Near a cabin wall, you hear someone hum a melody under the breath while twisting fibres together by firelight. The tune is quiet, almost private, but steady. A child nearby traces the rhythm with fingertips against a knee. No proclamation is made. None is needed. Music can hold memory even when words are risky. It can mark grief, patience, endurance, and belonging without announcing itself to authority. Religion, too, can become a site of inward resistance. A biblical story heard in church may be interpreted privately through the lens of captivity and liberation. A prayer may carry meanings deeper than the official sermon allows. Spiritual life in such a place is rarely simple. It bends, absorbs, translates, and shelters. A system may command attendance, but it cannot perfectly control what people do with stories once they hear them. There are physical forms of sabotage that hover at the edge of the record, a tool dulled through careless handling, a fence left less secure than it should be, a task performed badly enough to disrupt, but not so badly as to invite immediate retaliation. These acts are difficult to document because successful sabotage often leaves little trace, and failed sabotage may be punished before it is carefully recorded. Still, plantations everywhere bred such possibilities. Where domination is constant, hidden interference becomes tempting. One quirky reality of life in 17th century Virginia is that the colony is often more fragile than it pretends. Fences break, livestock wander, boats leak, tools split, fire can destroy weeks of labour, tobacco can spoil, weather can undo planning with insulting speed. In such a vulnerable environment, a small act of disruption may have larger effects than powerful people like to admit. Control looks solid from a distance. Up close, it depends on endless maintenance. Resistance also takes emotional forms. Refusing to internalize the colonist's judgment, maintaining affection where the system expects only utility, laughing at a powerful person out of earshot, keeping a private standard of worth. These are not legal victories, but they matter. A slave society wants more than labour. It wants the colonized mind to agree with its hierarchy. Any inward refusal disturbs that aim. You see this in humour, quiet and sharp. Someone mutters an observation about a planter's vanity and another person smothers a laugh. A shared glance turns pompous authority briefly ridiculous. Gentle sarcasm becomes a social tool, not merely for amusement, but for perspective. If you can still see the absurdity in people who claim to own you, then some part of your inner world remains your own. Tyranny hates being laughed at. It prefers solemn obedience. Mutual aid is another vital form of defiance. A woman holds another's child so food can be prepared. A man quietly shares a better tool or offers help with a difficult task. Someone passes along a warning about an overseer's temper. Someone else saves a little food for a person who has been denied enough. These actions reduce the system's power by making people less isolated and less dependent on the mercy of owners. Solidarity, even in tiny portions, changes what survival feels like. You stand near the edge of a field at dusk and smell cut grass, river damp, and the faint lingering bitterness of tobacco leaf. Fireflies blink over the low ground. The world looks almost tender, which feels rude under the circumstances. Yet beauty exists even in terrible places, and people sometimes use that fact to hold on. A familiar star, the shape of a tree at evening, the comfort of cool air after heat. Noticing beauty can itself become resistance when a system wants life reduced to labour and fear. Children learn these quiet strategies early, not formal rebellion, perhaps, but caution, codes, and observation. They learn which adults can be trusted, They learn when to be silent. They learn that some stories are for indoors and after dark. They learn that a look can mean no, go, wait, or not here. Such lessons are not childhood as it should be. They are childhood adapted to oppression. Still, learning them means the next generation inherits not only danger, but skill. Some resistance takes the form of preserving the body as best one can, resting when the chance appears, saving a scrap of cloth, using herbs to treat pain, eating a little extra when possible, avoiding unnecessary risk on certain days so strength remains for worse days ahead. These choices may not look political to outsiders, but in a labour regime built on exhaustion, self-preservation is deeply meaningful. To remain alive, competent, and inwardly intact is no small thing. There is scholarly uncertainty over how much organised collective resistance existed in Virginia at this early date, compared with the more documented conspiracies and revolts of later periods. The evidence for large-scale planning in the early 17th century is limited and uneven, but the absence of clear documentation does not prove passivity. Archives favour spectacular crisis and official panic. Everyday resistance often leaves only hints, impressions, and outcomes without confession. The colony senses this hidden defiance, even when it cannot fully name it. That is why masters want stricter discipline, clearer laws, more surveillance, and stronger racial boundaries. They understand that human beings forced into bondage do not become willing instruments simply because they are coerced. Beneath the visible order lies constant friction. Power feels it. That is why it keeps tightening. As the night deepens, the settlement grows quieter, but not truly still. Somewhere an infant wakes and is soothed back to sleep. Somewhere two adults continue a low conversation long after the fire is dimmed. Somewhere a person lies awake, planning nothing dramatic, only the next day's small acts of endurance. The smell of wet earth rises stronger now. The moon, if visible, lays a pale wash across the path between cabins. Darkness holds both fear and possibility. That is what resistance looks like here in 1662. Not always a break in the chain, often a hand slipping briefly free inside it, a slowed task, a hidden remedy, a guarded joke, a whispered warning, a remembered song, a night journey, a refusal to let the system define the whole meaning of a life. The colony wants submission to become habit. Black Americans answer, again and again, with quieter habits of their own. Survival itself becomes an argument. Dignity becomes practice, and in the dark, where the marsh breathes and the insects sing, those small acts gather their own kind of strength. By late afternoon, the heat has begun to loosen, though only slightly, and the plantation seems to hold its breath beneath a pale, dusty sky. The air smells of warm wood, trampled grass, horse sweat, and the faint sour trace of the river at low tide. From the main house comes the murmur of voices, sharper than usual, followed by a chair scraping across the floor. Men are talking business. In Virginia, that often means they are discussing labour, land, control, and whatever moral acrobatics are needed to make greed sound respectable. You step nearer and begin to sense the deeper anxiety shaping the colony. White planters do not simply want workers, they want predictability, they want obedience that does not need to be renegotiated. They want a social order where poor whites remain useful, black labour remains controllable, and no one below them discovers too much in common with anyone else below them. Their fear is not only of disorder in the abstract, it is of alliance, movement, and uncertainty. It is of losing their grip. A mainstream historical fact sits squarely at the centre of this world. As 17th century Virginia grew more dependent on plantation labour, elite colonists increasingly hardened racial distinctions between Europeans and Africans. This helped justify slavery while also reducing the chance that poor whites and black labourers might see shared interests in their exploitation. Racial hierarchy did not replace class tension, it helped manage it. Inside the house, the room is close and dim despite the remaining daylight. It smells of pipe smoke, damp wool, ink, and the faint sweetness of imported drink poured into cups that their owners handle with great seriousness. A planter leans over a table, speaking in a tone that suggests he is burdened by civilization itself. Another worries about labour shortages, another complains of insolence, another talks of law, as if law were a fence that only ever needs to keep danger out, never justice, and their words are polished compared with the field. But the appetite beneath them is the same. What white Virginians fear most is not always a single event, it is instability. Too few workers, too much negotiation, too many claims by people they wish to command. They want labour that stays put, reproduces itself, and can be distinguished clearly from the labour of those who may one day gain freedom. That is where racial thinking becomes useful. It turns economic desire into social doctrine. It gives permanent language to what began as hungry improvisation. You can hear this doctrine forming in casual remarks as much as formal ones. An English servant may be cursed, beaten, or overworked, but is still imagined by the elite as belonging, however awkwardly, within the wider category of English society. A black labourer is increasingly cast outside that circle altogether. The distinction matters enormously. It allows powerful people to present suffering as temporary for some and natural for others. Once a hierarchy is described as natural, cruelty becomes easier to administer without blushing. This does not mean poor white colonists live comfortably. Far from it. Many are indebted, hungry, overworked, and subject to harsh discipline. They labour in the same climate, endure the same mosquitoes, trudge through the same mud, and know the same ache of empty prospects. But elite Virginians can offer them one intoxicating thing, even when material rewards remain thin: status, not land necessarily, not comfort, certainly not elegance, but status above black people. That poisoned gift becomes one of the colony's strongest social tools. Historians still argue about exactly how quickly race hardened into the colony's central organising principle, as distinct from a broader landscape of labour exploitation and social hierarchy. Some scholars emphasise continuity from earlier systems of unfree labour. Others stress the accelerating importance of anti-black legal distinctions by the mid-17th century. The debate concerns pace and emphasis more than direction. By 1662, the colony is very clearly moving toward a more fixed racial order. The fear of solidarity haunts this movement. Elite planters know that people who work side by side can notice similarities. A poor English servant and a black labourer may both know hunger, blows, surveillance, and exhaustion. They may both resent the arrogance of men who profit from other bodies. That possibility is dangerous to those at the top, so the colony works hard to teach difference, exaggerate it, and reward identification with whiteness, even when whiteness comes with little bread attached. It is a shabby bargain, really. A planter may deny a poor white man security, land, and gentleness, then expect gratitude because at least he is not black. And often, the bargain works. Social systems do not survive on force alone. They survive by persuading some of the exploited to cling to rank over solidarity. Virginia is becoming skilled at this miserable craft. Outside, the plantation yard offers its own evidence. White labourers may sleep in rough quarters, wear patched clothes, and eat plain food. Black labourers endure the same material harshness and far greater legal danger. Over time, the law begins to separate these experiences more decisively. Terms of service for some, lifetime bondage for others, future possibilities for some, hereditary enslavement for others. The distinction is not accidental, it is political design. One curious detail of colonial elite life is how anxious wealthy men can seem while surrounded by the products of other people's labour. A polished cup, a sturdier chair, better cloth, a locked chest. These signs of status do not soothe them as much as they hoped. Instead, they often become more concerned with defending privilege once they have it. A man who has acquired 10 comforts suddenly lives in terror that someone may question comfort number 3. Wealth rarely cures fear, it just furnishes it. You walk near the stables and catch the smells of hay, manure, leather, and animal heat. A groom moves quietly around a horse, checking tack with practiced hands. Nearby, 2 white men speak in low voices about servants, prices, and discipline. Their conversation drifts toward race with disturbing ease, as though they are discussing weather patterns or fence posts. That casualness matters. It shows how ideology settles into ordinary speech. When people begin repeating hierarchy without effort, the structure has dug in deeply. Elite fear also feeds legal innovation. A society worried about labour control produces laws that define status more sharply, restrict movement more carefully, and punish disobedience more visibly. It seeks records, categories, and inheritance rules that reduce uncertainty. What looks from above like governance often looks from below like panic in tidy handwriting. The ruling class wants the future fence before it arrives. Religion plays a part here too, though not always openly. White colonists often imagine themselves as bearers of order and civilization. A flattering story with obvious emotional benefits. It helps them see hierarchy as moral responsibility rather than appetite. If they are the guardians of proper society, then repression can be framed as stewardship. This is a very convenient fantasy, especially for people making money from coercion. The colony's leaders also fear mobility in the broader sense, geographic mobility, when workers move without permission, social mobility, when status claims become uncertain, legal mobility, when loopholes allow contest, emotional mobility, when sympathy crosses boundaries it is not supposed to cross. They want each person fixed in place, legible, and predictable. Black enslavement becomes central to that dream because it promises the sharpest form of fixity. There are small signs of this fixation everywhere. Questions about parentage, curiosity about baptism, worry over mixed ancestry children, concern about who may testify, own, inherit, gather, or travel. None of these concerns are random. They emerge from a ruling class trying to seal cracks. The more categories begin to wobble, the more eagerly elite colonists seek hard edges. They are not calm architects of order. They are nervous managers of contradiction. A fringe truth about many colonies is how vulnerable they remain beneath their official confidence. Disease can sweep through, crops can fail, trade can falter, indigenous resistance can reshape settlement patterns, storms can undo months of work, labourers can flee, fires can spread. Yet the planters speak as though authority were a permanent feature of the landscape, as stable as the river. It is not. It must be reinforced daily, which is precisely why they're so preoccupied with control. You notice that white anxiety does not always look dramatic. Sometimes it appears as paperwork, sometimes as sermons about obedience, sometimes as new rules for children, labour terms, or punishment, sometimes as a planter staring too long at a field, calculating future yield and future risk together. Fear can wear a composed face. It can sound reasonable. That often makes it more dangerous. For Black Americans, these fears translate directly into harsher reality. The colony's effort to divide labourers by race means fewer ambiguities to exploit, fewer openings in custom, and more confidence among owners that their claims are natural and permanent. White anxiety becomes black constraint. Every insecurity at the top is answered with tighter limits below, and yet there is something revealing in how much the elite worry. They worry because domination is not self-maintaining. They worry because labourers have wills, memories, families, and eyes. They worry because any system built on coercion knows, somewhere beneath its rhetoric, that it is unnatural. No amount of law can erase that knowledge entirely. It can only bury it under habit, profit, and repeated force. Near sunset, the light turns coppery across the fields and catches in the dust rising from a passing cart. The wheels groan, a horse flicks its tail. Smoke begins to lift again from cooking fires. The evening smells of ash, drying grass, and the faint promise of cooler air. Around the plantation, people move through the end of the day with bodies shaped by work and minds shaped by caution. In the main house, calculations continue. In the yards and cabins, consequences are lived. A white child may grow up hearing that the order of society is natural. A poor white servant may be encouraged to cling to racial status as compensation for hardship. A planter may tell himself he is preserving civilization. A minister may speak of hierarchy as divine. Together these stories create a colony in which fear hardens into policy, and policy into common sense. That is how oppressive systems become durable. They do not rely only on chains and punishments. They teach people what to fear and whom to fear with. By the time darkness begins to settle, the plantation has grown quieter on the surface. Crickets start their steady chorus. A breeze moves through the trees with a sound like soft brushing cloth. You stand in that dimness and sense the full shape of white Virginia's unease. It is an unease about labour, status, and control. Yes, but more deeply, it is an unease about a society that cannot deliver wealth without violence, and cannot sustain violence without explanation. Race becomes that explanation. Law becomes its shield. Daily life becomes the place where it is repeated until it feels ordinary. This is what white Virginians fear in 1662. Not merely chaos, though they say that often enough. They fear any world in which black people cannot be fixed into permanent subordination, and poor whites cannot be recruited into defending that arrangement. So they build distinctions, nurture prejudice, reward loyalty to whiteness, and write their insecurity into law. The result is a colony that calls itself orderly while revealing, at every turn, just how frightened it really is. The evening river moves slowly under a darkening sky, its surface catching the last scraps of light like dull metal. The air feels softer now, though it still carries the heat stored in the earth all day. You smell marsh water, cooling tobacco leaf, smoke from scattered fires, and the faint green scent of reeds stirring at the bank. Insects drone in the grass with tireless devotion. Somewhere a night bird calls once, then falls silent. The colony is settling into darkness, but the thing it has made will not sleep. By 1662, Virginia is no longer merely experimenting with labour. It is building a system that wants to outlast individual tempers, harvests, and even generations. That is the deeper meaning of the year. A colony that once contained certain uncertainties has begun to replace them with design, law, work, religion, family life, and racial thinking are being tightened together until they form something harder to break. Slavery is becoming not only severe, but structured, not only violent, but self-renewing. A mainstream historical fact gives this moment its terrible weight. When Virginia declared that a child's status followed the mother, it helped transform slavery into a hereditary institution that could expand through birth as well as purchase. This was one of the clearest legal steps toward making black bondage permanent in English North America. It did not create every element of slavery at once, but it made the system more stable for owners and more inescapable for the enslaved. You can feel that change not just in legal records, but in the atmosphere of ordinary life. The field, the kitchen, the church bench, the courthouse doorway, the cradle, the yard at dusk, the whispered conversation after dark. All of these places now sit inside a colony that is learning to make inherited inequality feel routine. A mother's child can be claimed in advance. A father's care has no guaranteed protection. A family's love can be acknowledged privately and ignored publicly. A labourer's body can be read as future property before it has finished growing. This is what makes the system so chilling. It is not content with controlling the present. It reaches forward. It wants tomorrow. It wants children not yet born. It wants legal certainty wrapped around human life so tightly that even tenderness becomes vulnerable to ownership. The colony has found a way to turn reproduction into revenue and call the arrangement natural. Few sentences in law have ever carried so much cold ambition in so little space. You walk past the great house and then away from it, toward the cabins where the real cost of that ambition is lived. Firelight glows in doorways. The smell of cornmeal and wood smoke hangs low in the air. A child laughs briefly, then is hushed. A woman adjusts a blanket over sleeping shoulders. A man sits with his elbows on his knees, staring into embers as if trying to draw an answer from them. These are not abstract victims in a legal transformation. These are people building meals, raising children, soothing pain, sharing tools, mending cloth, and carrying memory under a system designed to use every one of those acts against them. One of the colony's most destructive achievements is its ability to hide moral rupture inside daily habit. A planter can discuss prices in the morning, order labour at noon, and sleep soundly at night while believing himself respectable. A minister can speak of God's order while avoiding the obvious human disorder around him. A clerk can write down a rule that shapes generations and then put away his pen. Repetition turns horror into routine. That is how systems survive. Not because they are just, but because they become familiar. Historians still debate how inevitable this hardening was, and whether different choices in law, labour and religion might have slowed or altered the process. Some emphasise the colony's economic hunger and labour needs. Others point to racial ideology taking stronger shape as a guiding force. Still others stress the improvisational nature of early Virginia, where many decisions emerge from immediate pressures rather than some grand master plan. The uncertainty matters, but one fact remains painfully clear. Human beings made these choices. They were not delivered by weather, fate, or soil. That truth can be easy to miss in a place so dominated by landscape. Virginia feels old and damp and inevitable. Rivers cut their way through the land with calm authority. Trees stand over paths that seem to remember older worlds than the colony. The marsh breathes in and out with the tide, but the social order growing here is not natural in the way rivers are natural. It is built. It is argued into being, written into being, enforced into being. That means it has designers, beneficiaries, and defenders, and there is a peculiar harshness in how quickly people adjust to new forms of power once profit begins to flow. A legal change that should shock the conscience becomes a practical convenience. A child's future becomes an accounting expectation. A woman's body becomes a site of projected labour. A family bond becomes secondary to estate management. The colony calls this stability. The people living under it would know better. You notice how many parts of daily life have been pulled into the trap. Work disciplines the body. Law defines status. Religion blesses hierarchy. Household custom normalizes dependence. Racial language explains why some suffering should count less than others. Even geography assists. Isolated plantations reduce collective strength. Rivers carry goods outward and authority inward. Distance makes oversight uneven, but it also makes rescue unlikely. The whole world around you begins to cooperate with the logic of enslavement, even when not every person within it fully understands the scale of what is happening. One quirky but revealing detail of colonial life is how often improvised conditions still produce very durable injustice. Houses are crude, roads are poor, tools break, records can be incomplete, livestock wander exactly where they should not. And yet out of this rough and muddy setting emerges a legal social order strong enough to wound generations. Human beings do not need polished institutions to create oppression. Sadly, they can improvise it quite effectively. You pass a storage room where tobacco is packed into casks for shipment. The smell is thick, dry, and almost sweet enough to seem innocent. Men speak of weights, quality, and transport with business-like focus. The leaf will cross the ocean. Money will move. Debts may ease for some. New goods may arrive. But inside every barrel is accumulated labour, and inside the labour is coercion, increasingly tied to black heredity. Trade and law are joined now. The Atlantic world is helping reward Virginia for becoming more ruthless. That broader connection matters. The colony is not isolated. It belongs to a larger English imperial economy hungry for crops, profit, land, and disciplined labour. Decisions made in Virginia speak to pressures from overseas, and the goods produced here feed wider appetites. Slavery is becoming not just a local arrangement between master and labourer, but part of a transatlantic structure. Ships, merchants, laws, and plantations all begin to reinforce one another. The trap is local in experiences but wide in design. The result for Black Americans is a narrowing horizon. Not the end of resistance, not the end of family, not the end of memory or spirit, but a tightening of the world around those things. Openings become fewer, ambiguities become less useful. Claims to Christian kinship grow less protective. Maternal descent becomes a legal chain. Children enter life with futures more firmly bounded by race and status. This is why 1662 matters so much. It does not merely intensify suffering in the present. It arranges suffering to continue. And still, the people forced to live within this order remain more than the order can fully explain. A mother's care does not become less real because the law ignores it. A father's concern does not vanish because his rights are denied. A child's curiosity is not erased by the colony's greed. Songs are still sung. Food is still prepared with judgment and memory. Jokes still survive in low whispers. Affection still settles into gestures of touch, voice, and habit. The system grows harder. Humanity does not disappear with it. You see that most clearly at night, when official language recedes and ordinary life becomes audible again. Someone hums while rinsing a pot. Someone murmurs a prayer over a sleeping child. Someone shares a warning. Someone saves a little food for morning. These acts do not destroy the structure surrounding them, but they prevent that structure from becoming the whole truth. A slave society tries to reduce people to labouring bodies and inherited status. People answer by continuing to feel, remember, interpret, and care. The answer may be quiet, it is still an answer. There is also something revealing in how much effort the colony must invest to sustain the system. Laws must be written. Hierarchies must be preached. Punishments must be threatened. Distinctions must be explained again and again. White anxieties must be managed. Poor whites must be persuaded. Black resistance must be watched. Families must be disrupted. Children must be categorized. Property claims must be reaffirmed. Nothing about this order is effortless. It requires constant maintenance precisely because human beings are not born believing in it. The evening darkens toward full night. Fireflies drift over the low grass like small floating embers. The river reflects a pale stripe of moonlight between shadowed banks. The air on your skin is cooler now, carrying relief that the day never quite offered. Yet the relief is only physical. Beneath it lies the knowledge that the colony has crossed an important threshold. Slavery here is no longer simply something done. It is something organized to endure. That endurance is perhaps the most haunting part. A single law cannot explain every sorrow that follows, but it can help shape the framework in which sorrow multiplies. Once bondage becomes hereditary through the mother, the institution gains a cruel continuity. Owners may imagine future labour before children can speak. Estates may be planned around human inheritance. Social boundaries may be taught as permanent facts. The colony has built itself a machine that grows through birth, and that machine will cast a very long shadow. So you stand beside the dark water and let the sounds of Virginia settle around you. Frogs call from the marsh, leaves stir overhead, a distant door closes, smoke thins into the night air. Somewhere nearby, a child sleeps under a rough blanket, breathing softly, not knowing the law has already reached out to define the shape of a life. Somewhere else, an adult lies awake, tired beyond words, carrying knowledge that cannot be set down. In 1662, slavery becomes more than harsh labour and daily domination. It becomes a structure with roots meant to deepen. That is the terrible brilliance of the system. It learns how to continue. Now the night grows gentler. The river no longer looks brown or grey, only dark and smooth, like silk pulled through careful fingers. The noises of the colony soften one by one. A final murmur from a cabin, a horse shifting in its stall, the low crackle of a fire settling into ash. The air cools your face and hands, and the smell of marsh grass grows sweeter as the heat fades from the ground. You let the harder edges of the day drift outward. The courthouse is quiet now. The fields are still. The barns stand in shadow. Overhead, the stars appear in patient silence, untouched by the rules written below them. The land itself seems to breathe more slowly. Reeds sway by the water. Tree branches hold the dark like folded velvet. Even the insects, for all their steady song, begin to sound less like insistence and more like rhythm. You picture small circles of warmth behind wooden walls, a sleeping child, a blanket pulled close, a tired hand resting at last, a low hum in the dark, almost too soft to hear. Human life, fragile and persistent, continuing in whispers and breath. The colony may try to arrange everything into rank and ownership, yet night has a way of blurring the sharpest lines. In the dark, what remains most real is the simple fact of people resting, hoping, enduring. So let the river carry the noise away. Let the smoke rise and disappear among the stars. Let the heavy air grow light around you. The fields can fade. The legal words can fade. The voices of power can fade too. What stays is the quiet image of night settling over water, grass, timber, and sleeping hearts. And with that stillness around you, you can finally drift, slowly and peacefully, into rest.